Well, I'm really excited to get into today's topic with you both today on this opening day of Maison 2024. And Gemma, you've been going to Maison for years and years and years. So yeah, like me, it's like in decades. It's actually been quite a while. And Joe is a first-timer at Maison. So what would you recommend that Joe check out first?
The show does a really good job in curating the selection. This year, there's a focus on the Nordics. So there's a roster of talents from Finland, Iceland, Sweden. It's going to be really interesting, I think. I would start there to see what's new and emerging and then explore the show.
Welcome to the Create Tomorrow podcast. I'm your host, Lisa White, Director of Strategic Forecasting at WGSN. Today is the start of Maison Objet 2024, the holy grail event for anyone involved in the world of decor and design. The international trade fair is held twice a year in Paris and showcases the best in lifestyle, interior design, and home decor products. So on this Maison Objet special, we're going to explore everything from key product design trends to shopper trends, sharing the insights you need in the highlights of this year's Maison. Joining me to discuss this topic is Gemma Riberti, Director of Interiors. Hi, Gemma.
Hi, hello.
And Joe McDonnell, Director of WGSN Insight. Hi, Joe.
Hi, good morning.
I'm excited to get into today's topic with you both on today, the opening day of Maison Objet 2024. So, Gemma, what are you and the team excited about at Maison this time around?
Well, it's always really interesting to go check out what is the rising talent, what are the regions that are highlighted there. So it's the Nordics this time. I think also the trend forums have been really stepping up their game with a focus on what's new in retail, hospitality, decor, really good curation of the best pieces in show, basically, with a strong visual narrative, actually. And the designer of the year is a really interesting personality. That's Lionel Jadot from Belgium. He's the designer of the year for hospitality. He's done some amazing work in terms of hotel design. He's one of the founders of the Zaventem Atelier, which is an incredible space where creativity ferments. So for instance, in Milan, they've been hosting an exhibition a bit in a remote location. So this year, finally, I got the chance to go and visit it, and it was mind-blowing. This is actually where you go and see creativity bubbling up, experimentations with materials, with finish. It was really, really interesting. And he really explores how to work with recycled materials, even bringing that in hospitality design. So really finding that balance between approachable commercial applications and the research, the innovation with that. So that's definitely something to keep an eye out for.
What's interesting with him too, it's very collaborative, his approach. And that fits in so well with what we've been discussing in our macro trends about the me and the we. He's a designer, but he works with a lot of other designers, and it's just very much a group approach.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's someone to check out, Joe, when you're there.
So, and Joe, nesting is one of the retail trends that you're going to be focusing on, and it's very appropriate for an interiors trade show. So nesting for us has been very long-term as a trend. We've been talking about it for a very long time. The perma-crisis is making it increasingly important. So what does that mean from a retail perspective, though?
Absolutely. So I'm going to be doing Shopper Priorities, which is one of our hero reports that sits on Insight and really covers off everything you need to know from a consumer perspective about what is going to be driving shopping behaviors over the next 18 months or so. And Lisa, exactly like you said, a few years ago we had the poly crisis, which was this idea of numerous crises intertwining and it just being really difficult to essentially see the wood for the trees, being really difficult to unpick anything. And that has morphed, as I'm sure everyone listening will agree, into the perma-crisis, which is just a near state of consistent crisis. Everything seems to be going wrong at the same time. And almost no matter what metric you look at, consumers feel that way. And obviously there is a little bit of, I guess, speculation, but depending on how you cut the data, things are getting better in some areas. We are making improvements globally in, things like women's literacy, number of girls in school, cancer treatments, things are getting better. But when you survey people, actually everyone almost feels like everything across the world is getting worse all of the time. And that ties in so perfectly to nesting or restorative nesting, which is this idea of making your space as comfortable as possible, making it a sanctuary. And obviously so important during COVID because we couldn't do anything. Home was everything. It was your office, it was your playground, it was your gym. And what's happened post-COVID, and a kind of recurring theme for what I'm going to be talking about today, is the cost of living crisis. So stats came out last week that 68% of consumers view this as the main priority when they think about their spending. So it's this kind of double whammy of wanting to have a very comfortable, a very safe, a tranquil space that ties into a lot of the interiors trends that I know Gemma's talking about, but also wanting to do that on a budget and wanting to balance that. And I think the other thing that's super interesting as well that we unpack in my talk is, particularly in the States, mixed generation households. And what does restorative nesting, what does creating a comfortable space look like when nearly half of those 18 to 29 live with their parents in the States? So that's Gen Z and kind of younger millennials. So how can you create this comfortable space that works multi-generationally as well is super important.
And that's what I'm living on a daily basis, because I've got my 25-year-old at home. And so everybody needs their own space to feel comfortable, but then you've got to create the space for being together too.
Exactly.
And Gemma, I've got a question for you, because you mentioned Lionel Jadot is the upcoming designer of the year. And then last year, or towards the beginning of this year, it was Mathieu Lehanneur. And do you expect to see much of his influence at the fair?
I think in general, due to his major influence with the amazing work that he's done for the Olympics, everyone will know his name. So definitely rise in collaborations, in opportunities where he might bring his vision, his approach to product design, to spatial design, will be a winning point to gain new audiences for many of the brands, for the exhibitors. Personally, I really appreciate his design approach. There is always a poetry, a calmness, kind of a thoughtful lightness at the heart of it, of even the materials that he works with. He manages to convey this sense of lightness that comes through.
He's definitely becoming and approaching national design treasure in France right now. And I drove past his amazing balloon cauldron last night because it's up again for the Paralympics. And what's interesting with him is he can be very, very global and very, very French at the same time. And what he does is he's so great at mixing the elements as well too. So that, that cauldron is basically powered by, light and water, and, even though it looks like fire. But what I liked last time in January was he created this cabin called Autonomy, with an out, like autonomy. And it's a contemporary home in which you can live off the grid, but very, very comfortably. And you had sort of this beautiful water tank that doubled as a window. And then you had lots of soft things, but the whole thing was completely yellow, even the shingles, everything. And it really stood out, and it made you, again, like you said, bring up a smile, and you just gravitated to that like the sun. And I wanted to ask you too, because of yellow, seems to be coming up as well too. And we've been talking about interiors for a while. And besides that Resource and Renault collaboration, do you think you're going to be seeing a lot of yellow today on the floors?
I expect that. Well, from our point of view as WGSN, we do have Panna Cotta, yellow as a key color for autumn-winter 24-25. So this season, we have Rayflower for spring-summer 25. So I do advocate for a stronger presence of yellow in interiors overall. It's soft yellows, a nuance, a color that really brings that kind of sun-kissed glow to the space or to the product, which is very important. It's really treating yellow more, not as a near neutral, but kind of a more versatile color, actually, indeed, for that luminosity with the darker woods becoming more premium or more utilitarian in industrial context. On the other hand, Lehanneur's Autonomy cabin was dressed, it was a yellow that was almost like electric, a bit acidic. And that is something that we are seeing fermenting, that we are seeing emerging actually in really interesting iterations in Milan, a little bit at Maison last year. So I'd be really curious to see what products will pick this up at this edition of Maison. And we have this kind of like acidic kind of yellow, a bit, really impacting our palettes for the upcoming seasons. So it will be how this injections comes and disrupts almost the looks.
On the topic of color, actually, Fiat last year came out, and it's something we talk about in the presentation, and said they are focused on color for the next few years. And what they're going to do is they're not making any gray cars. Gray cars are boring, and there's enough gray cars on the road. So they're only making colorful cars outside of the gray color palette.
And Gemma as well too, because last Maison we called out 3D printing as being very important in going mass. And today at Maison, what do you expect to see? How do you see that trend evolving?
That's a very good point. Actually, Maison was the first show where we called out 3D printing going mass with the previous September and last January's edition. It keeps growing basically since then. The applications are everywhere at all scales. So, it's really interesting to see what are the new opportunities in terms of sustainability, in terms of product development, of personalization as well. I mean, manufacturing on demand, what kind of composites, what kind of materials can be the point of departure for creating the product, from decorative elements to planters to whole furniture setting. There's so much going on with everything from recycled plastics to 3D printing with clay. There's such a spectrum of exploration from the industrial to the crafted that 3D printing is playing with, that idea of almost like digital craft coming to the fore.
You're listening to the WGSN Create Tomorrow podcast, and in this episode, we're discussing Maison Objet on day one of the International Trade Fair held twice a year in Paris. I'm Lisa White, Director of Strategic Forecasting at WGSN, and my guests today are Joe McDonnell, Director of WGSN Insight, and Gemma Riberti, Director of WGSN Interiors. So, Joe, since 3D printing is all about personalization and individualization, how do you see that panning out from a shopper perspective?
Well, I've seen a lot of content on social media about 3D printing. Admittedly, it is still quite niche, but the idea is that you, around the house, you've got a table that's wobbly. You can 3D print a little bit to stop the table wobbling. It's huge in the outdoor space as well. I've seen people 3D printing bike parts, like bike elements, even making kind of garages and making, I don't know what you'd call them, kind of things that you can stick to the wall, different pegs, so you can kind of customize and you can put tools and things on. It's all the content that I've seen, all the consumer content that I've seen has been very practical. It's been solving solutions, particularly in the kind of hardware DIY space. Now, that might just be my algorithm. I've just moved house, so I'm very focused on DIY, but I think there's a lot of value there, but is still niche, right? It's a very small percentage of consumers who have this. Potentially there's a scope for brands where it's relevant to offer access to 3D printers. So, if you kind of have a hardware store or kind of a lifestyle adjacent homewares shop, being able to 3D print something that allows you to have a plant pot and a candle holder and it's made to the exact spec is just a really, really nice build that adds a lot of value to the customer.
And to your point, actually, toys is another really interesting area of opportunity. You know what I've seen popping up online? It's 3D printed Lego parts. Either you've lost the piece, or you want to buy a specific Lego parts that goes and completes the set in a very specific way. So really bringing an element of personalization in there as well. Or 3D printing dolls and figurines that really are to the desire and dreams of the kids. 3D printing the drawings and the doodles that kids do. Those are really easy, giftable opportunities, and an opportunity for the manufacturers of toys to, as you say, maybe join a partnership or open up an opportunity to engage with consumers in a different way, because consumers are already doing it themselves. So owning it is definitely somewhere where they can step in.
Yeah, and getting to that part as well, too, I wanted to talk to you about kidulting, okay? Because that's been a trend that we've been forecasting for a long time. I remember that during the pandemic, US toy sales spiked 37%. We all assumed that was because parents were buying toys for the kids to keep them distracted and occupied. But the data that came in was that 58% of adults bought a toy during the pandemic, but they were buying them for themselves.
Yeah.
Joe, how do you see the kidult shopper playing out?
Well, it's very interesting. So I think there's a few different parts to this. Part of it is funflation, which we're big theme in my presentation, and that's this idea that people are trading down on everyday essentials and prioritizing treat yourself culture. And this is, you see this a little bit on social media, the idea of at 3:00, you need a little sweet treat. You need to go and get a cake and a hot chocolate or a coffee or something. But obviously it's also bigger than this. So at a macro level, it is trying to get Taylor Swift tickets. It is trying to get Oasis tickets. And then at a more micro level, it is really being cautious about how you spend your money. Again, the cost of living crisis just permeating through everything on this. And that is this idea, marketing science shows us that when we go into recession, people trade down on everyday essentials. So there's a few different categories that people don't want to swap on. That's kind of premium foodstuffs, presents for kids, basically any item for kids, really. And what you do is you trade down on your everyday essentials. So this could be dishwasher tablets, basic items of food, because you want to try and keep spending in certain categories. So a lot of this treat yourself culture at the moment is being driven by you still want to have that little gift. And obviously these categories depend on what the person is. It might be a scented candle, it could be a kid-alting item, it could be a chess set, it could be Lego, it could be a game. It doesn't really matter. It's just about which category it's in. So trying to maintain or reduce your spending so you can prioritize fun in other areas is really, really important.
And that's something that's really great at Maison Objet, because you've got the object part of Maison Objet. So you've got large things and small things, and there's an entire hall dedicated to gifting, and there's halls dedicated to scented candles. And, we've been talking about glimmers being such an important trend, that thing that sort of just makes your day. And Gemma, what do you think you're going to be seeing today at Maison that's going to be that glimmer?
I think the area around home and scent is getting more and more important. There is so much happening in that field, and diversification of the scents, of the vessels. Again, premium brands stepping into this field for the first time with the really curated, really beautiful in the look and feel of the small giftable scent diffusers, candle holders, etc. So those are definitely joy bringers or mood lifters, if you want. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that field. And there's also, the holiday section is somewhere where you also can find a lot of glimmers. That's something that consumers will always spend on to make it joyful for their nucleus, family, friends, the pets, whomever they decide to share the holidays with. But the small treat of a theme decoration, maybe a personalized decoration, growing opportunities in there are definitely something that Maison will keep exploring.
Definitely. The theme this time is very cosmic at Maison. And so you've got the idea of space. So all sorts of tech things that can go there too. They've got lots of giftable tech, but then also the spiritual element too. And last time round, I remember seeing these candles that were almost landscaped. They had all these little crystals in them and flowers and whatnot. And now let's talk again about retail perspectives, shopper perspectives. And at WGSN, we're very focused on helping our clients produce the right amount at the right time for the right market. And on the fact that consumers are already into buying less, but better quality and better designed. And how do you think that this is going to play out at Maison this time, Gemma? I'm going to ask you first.
Well, definitely in the past year, we've seen brands launching less product, being more cautious, if you want, focusing instead on relaunching or improving or expanding maybe on their material, color offering, scale offering for certain ranges as well, especially with a focus on the core products. Maison in January this year was already less new, if you want, than the previous September edition. There was the macro themes, the key conversations were rather continuing from the September one rather than bringing again new and exploring something else. So I think that is definitely a shift in the industry, in the approach to be more cautious around less new for newness sake. And let's be more focused on what can we do better. Let's listen to our customers and see what are the pain points. Maybe it's, for instance, in Milan this year, we were hearing this at a number of brands across all the different levels of the market. The innovation in this staple table is actually in the joint. We studied how to make it more sustainably made, or we studied how to produce it with less waste. We changed where we source our wood. So a lot more focus on the invisible, but at the same time, the values that actually matter, that help tell the story around a product. And I think it's a shift for the long term that we hope to see, that we want our clients to support them on this path, actually.
And shifting gears here, our colleague Joe McDonnell, director of WGSN Insight, is at Maison to give a talk today on retail trends, on shopper trends. So, Joe, based on this and on the way that we work at WGSN, what are some of the macro shopper shifts that you're going to share today? That's a lot of sure.
Yeah, there's a lot. It is a tough time, but a very exciting time for retail. So at the end part of 2024 into 2025, from a shopper perspective, is all about shoppers wanting more bang for their buck. People are becoming a lot more choosy about how and when they purchase. And what has developed is this high-low consumption economy. So people are trading down on things to save money for what they really want to spend money on, what they enjoy buying. And then at the same time, we've already discussed this, but there's this growth and this prioritization of things like fun, the fun economy, funflation, people trying to prioritize joy. We discussed glimmers. That can be everything from treating yourself to a fancy coffee or buying a scented candle or treating yourself to dinner with friends. It doesn't really matter. It kind of varies based on what kind of person you are. And that is really to offset against the trouble that you're seeing in the world. The other big themes, role of community is increasingly important. We know in times of trouble, in times of tension, that people do look to their local communities. They look to their friends, family, peer group. And that plays a really important role in retail when you think about local shops, local connections. Value, there's some really, really interesting data around we are living in this perma discount era. If you're anything like me, you're on just about every mailing list there is under the sun. And everything seems to be permanently discounted. But actually, some data that we've seen recently shows that a discount needs to be above 30% now in order to actually get a consumer's attention. This kind of sign up to the newsletter for 5%, 10% just isn't attracting consumers in the way it used to. And then the last big themes are doom spending, the kind of evolution of doom scrolling. So trying to get that dopamine hit, buying off social media and buying as a way to counteract the negativity in the world.
And it's interesting as well, too, because we're talking about the value market a lot. And at Maison, they've got a lot of great basics. They've got a lot of mid-price points as well, too. But there's a lot of luxury, too. And I'd kind of like to know, from a shopper perspective, how do you see the luxury market evolving?
As the world becomes more digitized, if you think about how you interact with brands, it's increasingly online. It's increasingly through a screen. Luxury brands are going the other way. So they're prioritizing either retail activations or actually doubling down on their retail footprint to create an environment where you can touch the leather goods, you can interact with the sales assistants, you can do whatever it is you do when you're making a luxury purchase. And actually on Insight, we've just published a excellent report by my colleague Rachel, which is specifically focused on the psychology of a big purchase. And a big purchase is this idea, it can span lots of different categories, but it's a significant purchase for that individual. And what are the levers that brands can pull to kind of influence that? And one of them is face-to-face. It's customer support, it's interacting with an expert. And the key thing here is, for these big purchases, they need to be an expert. So in the UK, about 69% of consumers, when they're making a big purchase, want to feel like the sales associate knows what they're talking about. And this could be, you're buying a washing machine. Admittedly, that's not necessarily a luxury good, but it is very expensive and it is necessary. You want to know that they know what they're talking about. And that's the same about whether you're buying a washing machine or whether you're buying a Porsche 911. You really want to have that connection there. Most people have done a considerable amount of research. When you think again about the kind of moments of truth, that marketing funnel, people have done a lot of research by the time they get into the store. They're usually decided, and this is just the kind of final checks and balances, or it's about creating an environment where you can demo products. And that's another key thing. So we did a retail safari in the summer, which is something we do at WGSN, where we go around and we go to loads of different retail stores and we take notes and we look at how they're using the space. We look at what products they're stocking. We look at everything, really. And we went round, we had a morning in London, we went around all the luxury stores. And one of the key things was that every single store had a lifestyle area. They had a cafe. They had somewhere where you could basically just sit amongst the handbags or the shoes or, whatever it was, and you could have a coffee. And admittedly, a very expensive coffee. We're talking £6 for coffee. But they were good, and they were kind of creating these tranquil environments. And actually, by 2027, up to 40% of physical retail spaces' income could be derived from things beyond retail. So these are creating those environments, creating little bars, putting on music events, basically diversifying and creating these third spaces that particularly Gen Z, okay, they're not buying huge amounts of luxury, but they're missing. There's been this erosion of third spaces, the idea of somewhere other than work and home that you can spend time. So there's a lot of experimentation in this kind of area. And yeah, we're seeing a whole range of different brands do super interesting things here.
I've always thought of shops as hospitality spaces anyway, because you're inviting people in, you're treating them right, you're giving them an experience as well too. And I think that's also why Maison has been upping its hospitality game over the past couple of years. And Gemma, I think from in the luxury hospitality perspective, what sort of interiors products, large or small, do you think are going to be coming to the fore at Maison and elsewhere?
I think craft plays a really important role in this. Craft in the sense of something that is handmade, but also that has a story to tell about the place, about the maker, about the sourcing, creating the connection. Definitely, there is a lot of interest in luxury hospitality, for instance, in complementing the space with the furniture, the decor, the elements that come from where the location is, that engage the visitor with the community that is around it, that with the makers that are in the area. There is a lot more effort into curating a proper storytelling around the know-how, around the manufacturing, around the materials, the sourcing. That is the next level in terms of luxury and hospitality.
From an insight perspective, hospitality, everything needs to be shoppable. In a hotel room, this is an ideal product sampling experience. If you're a kind of lifestyle brand, if you make coffee makers or bathrobes, whatever, anything that's appropriate for a hotel room or a kind of lifestyle space should be in there. It should all be shoppable. It should all be explained. Muji did something really interesting in Japan. They created an Airbnb just outside Tokyo where the entire Airbnb is just filled with Muji products, and you can you can book it for a weekend and you can kind of live the Muji lifestyle, which I imagine is just incredibly tranquil and very well made. So, there are some interesting brands doing fun things in that space as well.
Tactility is so important. As Joe was saying, people are really tired of being online on flat screens, digital experiences. They want in real life experiences. And as far as tactility is concerned, I know Maison was great because it showcases a lot of materials. And remember shearling, that was such a huge trend. You could just rub your fingers through that shearling chair and get that thrill. What are you seeing right now is going to be really important from a materials perspective at Maison?
That's an excellent question. Well, we definitely, what is next for boucle? Boucle is everywhere at the moment in terms of upholstery. We're seeing it, growing more textural even, and exploring more the faux furs, again, trying to tell a bit of an artisanal look and feel with the granularity, with the weave, the coarseness, but also how inviting it can be to sit on it, to touch it. It's something that is absolutely beautiful. And boucle growing more textural and more, inviting, basically, more calling for touch. Woods, there's always been some really wood material of the moment, very versatile, from premium to everyday utilitarian. There was actually quite a bit of softer woods, pine woods, kind of the cheaper woods from the look and feel, but growing more present, becoming more something more, or the plywoods as well, getting a makeover into more designer treatments in stand design, in product design, but also stain woods, very interesting. Metals, we always keep an eye for that because you can have everything from beautiful silverware and decorative elements. And we've been talking a lot about mirror finishes and plays with perception. So I've seen, for instance, one of the press releases, a lamp that by Sebastian Herkner that plays with that mirror effect, and it's very linear in the design or in the outlook, but it's the choice of the finishes and the idea of challenging the effect, challenging the perception of the space. That is really something quite fresh and quite interesting to keep an eye out for.
Thank you for that, Gemma. I can't wait to run my fingers through everything at Maison later today. Thank you to my guests, Joe and Gemma. If you're a WGSN subscriber, look out for our interior and retail and shopper forecast available at WGSN.com. And if you're not, please come and discover our services. We're constantly publishing new content focusing on how we can design a brighter, better future for industries, including food and drink, beauty, consumer tech, and sport and outdoor. We'll be back in 2 weeks for our next episode. Catch the CEO of WGSN, Carla Buzasci, next week on our other podcast, Lives of Tomorrow. Be sure to follow and subscribe to this podcast. See you next time.